HiSec Buyback offers 90% GDA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
This is Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online. I am your host, Artimus Albosa. Joining me in the station today, we have Nick Bison.
Hey, happy holidays to everybody, and hope you're enjoying it.
Happy holidays to you and your wonderfully festive shirt. I appreciate it. Also joining us on the stream, we have Kenneth Feld.
Good morning.
And last but certainly not least, we have Ren, who, as you can see, is flying an Astero. Nick, if you wouldn't mind, click the little eyeball plus on Ren's stream so that our viewers can see his lovely cloaked ship. Ren, are you flying a skin, or is it just the default base on your Astero there?
Skin on it.
Fair enough. And the reason that we have you in an Astero is because you're out there doing the new winter Nexus sites. These sites are still live as of time of recording, even though it's just past Christmas on December 26th as we speak. But they are live until January 4th, so there still is some time for you to get in on the joy and festivities. And Ren, when could you tell us about what the audience can expect?
I've been doing the low-sec ones in the Astero. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of PvP, a lot of hunting, cloaking, who can scan down the site faster, who can decloak and grab point on the guy before they warp off and all that sort of stuff. There's been all sorts of shenanigans. We had a Legion that tried to tackle me, and then some random +4s. I was like, hey, if we bait this Legion, you guys got to come and help. And they're like, yeah, sure. So we baited the Legion, and a couple Lokis dropped on top of him, and we won that little fight. It was bad PvP all round, but good fun as well.
Right on. And what's the reason everybody is out here dropping on each other? Which of the kinds of sites are you running?
I'm doing the Winter Nexus. I'm doing the Explo ones mainly. There's three types. There's the mining site, there's the exploration ones, and there's the combat sites. I'm doing the Explo. Most ships out here mainly being frigates, Synesises, and T3Cs.
The Synesis is an odd choice just hearing the name. That's the Sisters,
Destroyer,
not the
isn't
Sisters
it?
of Eve, the other one. Like the younger brother of the Gnosis.
Yeah, it's a destroyer, but it has a lot of fitting and it has some advantages with probe scanning. So it works fairly well.
Right on. And are the sites in low sec going to be better in terms of like the ISK or the loot drops that you can get than ones in high sec, as an example?
Yeah, much better.
Right on. And of course, you can, with this event, it was one of the first events, I think, that came out with the filaments, and they're back again this year. So they've got the different named, and they can take you to different areas of space where the specific storms are. So correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but the storms are moving around over time. But that doesn't matter to you, because you can just go to JITA, buy one of the filaments to get to a specific area of space that you want to. So you could take one to high sec, take one to low sec, take one to null sec, and it will just spit you out in your ship in an area of space where this event is going on, where you've got the clouds of snow and these new event sites, right?
Yep, it's perfect. If you're doing the XY sites in high sec, I recommend getting a cheap Heron and coming out and doing them in low sec. You're going to make 10 times the ISK. You're going to get blown up a few times, but that's why we use a cheap Heron. And each of these sites are giving out more ISK per each site than your Heron's going to be worth. All you got to do is find a couple of sites near an NPC station, drop all your stuff off in the NPC station, and when you get blown up, go jump out, try it again, do it for a little while, and eventually jump out with some T1 Indy ships and like a Norose, pick up all your loot, and then use a high sec filament to bring it back into high sec. And you might lose 10, 15 Herons, but you're going to make a lot more risk than they're worth. And it's relatively easy stuff. It's a lot of fun. And maybe you'll learn how to PvP a little bit and start flying a little bit better ships.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about the other kinds of sites out there. We were having a discussion prior to the stream going live about the high-sec PvE sites and what people are using to run them. What are those sorts of things like? We're talking specifically the combat sites where you're shooting at rats.
Yeah, so last year Hateless put out a video showing a Vagabond and a few other ships absolutely destroying these sites. And from what I've heard from friends who are running them, there's a lot of vagabonds out there from probably that video and doing it, but they're running into marauders. And with the marauder buff, the marauders are doing a lot more damage. And although they can't really shoot each other, in these high-sec sites you get a contest. And what you do is whoever does the most damage to the rats, I'm unsure if it's just the boss rat or the whole site, wins the contest. And then the site gives out a can at the end, and the can goes white for the guy who's done the most damage. The other person can grab the can, however, they go yellow flashy. So you can turn around and then shoot them and start a PvP fight if you wish, if they're trying to steal your can. But what's happened is the Marauders do so much more damage than any other ship going around that everyone who's not running a Marauder isn't really winning too many of these contests. So if you actually look at Jitter, all the Marauder prices have popped by about 20%, except for the Kronos. And I think it's because of this event.
Oh, right on. I mean, there's also a bit of a side conversation happening in our Twitch chat right now where we're discussing, instead of people in nullsec hot dropping like carriers and super carriers on people in Sovnull, they're just dropping marauders. Kenneth, can you confirm or deny, is this a thing?
Yeah, it's been happening for quite some time, especially for like ESS defense. If you actually have a real fleet come into your ESS and not some group of kitchen sink something or others, drop 15, 20 marauders on them. And, the reach with cruise missiles and artillery is just massive. And you can shoot all the way across the ball before they can get out. They can't micro warp drive out, so they don't balloon real bad. But if you have a golem in there and can target paint them, you can make them pretty big, and you can evaporate a fleet pretty quickly.
Oh, wow. Are you not worried about like one of your marauders getting evaporated and like losing the score and rewarding the hunters?
No, not so much. Most of the time when they drop them, it's overwhelming force, and it's just, they're toast. Before they, the minute they clicked on that ESS, they sealed their fate pretty much right then. So
if you actually work back with the CCP event a few months ago, that was the one for the developers, not the community team. Beyond B took out a fleet of Vargas and pretty much sat in an ESS and said, come get us with 20 Vargas or something. And anything that entered that grid just got evaporated one at a time. It just was destruction all around. They couldn't get anywhere near the Vargas. Like, we're talking 5-6 fleets of Feroxes and things showed up, and the Vargas are just like pop, pop, pop.
Yeah, and their rep bonuses are, at least the Golem for sure, put an extra large ASB on there, and it almost recharges full shields in a one overheat cycle. So it's they're quite. You need a coordinated fleet that's ready for it, and you better have a lot of people, or you're gonna, it's not gonna be pretty.
Well, that's awesome.
We had a question in chat. How do people want to terrorize on the cheap? I recommend a dual MASB Heron in exploit sites in lowsec, because the dual MASB Heron, if you're fighting even a Stero, which is a fairly jump up in class, if you're a decent pilot and you can actually manage your cap with the dual MSAB, you will destroy most Herons and Asteros. Like, they are sneaky, dangerous ships.
For the newer folk, let them know what an MASB is.
Medium Anseal Shield booster. I've got a fit here, I think, actually.
Yeah, well, you're pulling it up. I actually want to tell a story about how I used to fly that thing almost religiously for a few months in lowsec. Like, not for PvE running sites, just faction warfare novice complexes. Because you'd roll up in there, and in the novice complexes, it's restricted to just T1 or faction frigates. And the meta at the time was very much this sort of, people would try to scram kite you. So they'd come in and they'd scram and web you and basically keep you at a range where most other ships couldn't apply their DPS. But I would fit my Heron with some drones and some autocannons with just enough fall off to still reach them and just whittle them down slowly over time. And nobody expected it. It was extremely successful. But I guess you could also totally use it in an exploration sense and definitely surprise some people. I should mention the benefit of the medium ancillary shield boosters versus a normal shield booster that you're used to is the cap that Ren mentioned. So ancillary shield boosters, you load cap charges directly into them, and they eat those cap charges instead of your capacitor, at least until they run out.
But you use two, so you use one, and when the cap charges run out, you start reloading it because the reload takes like 45 seconds. So you use the second shield booster while you're reloading the first one, and then you swap back and forth. And as someone said, on those shield boosters, you use the smallest cap booster that will fit in it because it's the smallest volume, so you can have more of them in your cargo hold.
Yeah, and definitely look into the faction ones too. They'll have lower volumes, so you can fit more, and it's just like a sort of faction ammo. You don't have to really worry about the cost. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, one of these will do a lot of damage. What's interesting is the T1, Heron's a T1 frigate. The T2 version of it's the Buzzard. The Buzzard is nowhere near as good as the T1 version of the Heron, and the main reason for that is it doesn't have a drone bay. So you take out a lot of the damage that this does, because this thing can fit 7 drones, where a Buzzard cannot. So if I'm warping in on a Buzzard, I know it's an easy kill. If I'm warping in on a Heron, and it's a decent pilot with this sort of fit, I know it's going to take me 5 minutes to break his tank and kill him. And I've got a good Astero that's not cheap.
All right, well, that was an awesome bit of a tangent to take. Quick correction, it seems like the conversation that was being had in Twitch chat I misread, and they were actually talking about dropping Marauders in low-sec. So it seems that Marauders are prevalent no matter where you go, at least up to a particular scale. And I mean, you're certainly risking it. You're stuck on field for at least a minute. You've got billions, quite literally, of ISK on the grid. I'm quite happy with the state of the Marauder meta, as it would be.
Well, I think Marauders are more small gang, so up to about 10 people, because once you start getting above that sort of size, Feroxes and things like that can start alphaing them out. And once they start alphaing them, you're going to lose your score pretty quick. Whereas if you've got it relatively smaller fights, the Marauder can tank like an absolute boss.
Yeah, the other thing about those exploratory sites, something else to consider. If you, I don't know if you can, I don't think I can share my screen, but if you bring up Asteros and Z-Kill, you'll notice that for December, we're up about 20% in losses over November, and we're actually above October, and we're coming up on whatever the event was in May. But we're almost at 3,000 losses for December. Just due to these sites, it's quite a bit of jump. And the prices in JITA for Asteros have also jumped significantly.
Yeah, I bought 5 before the event started.
Yeah. I mean, low-sec, the Heron is the boss, but that doesn't keep people from using Asteros. And also the high-sec site, I think Astero is pretty much the preferred platform. So there are quite a bit being used and flown. Yeah, Nick, when you get there, scroll all the way down to the bottom till you get to the monthly stats.
Yeah, so in low-sec, the T3Cs are by far the best. Like, they're going to destroy anything that they come up against in any of these sites. And you're sort of usually fairly worried if a T3C is around. The next step down is sort of like the Pacifier, the Synesis, and the Astero. And then below that, you got the Herons and that sort of stuff. And then you got way below that, you got like the Buzzard and the Cheetahs, which are, their aim is to get on, scan down the site, do the site, and get off grid before anyone else can scan down the site.
Nick, I sent you a link in Discord to get to the stats page.
Yeah, you go to you have to click the stats at the top first and then scroll down to the bottom. Sorry.
There are a few tricks to do on these sites. They respawn really quickly, so I'll just show you one thing I've been doing. Well, once Nick shows all this.
Yeah, Nick has it up there now. You can see the kills per month. The kills and the losses both show up there and that's only the Astero.
I really am surprised by the efficiency of the Astero. I mean, if you look at the average person's kill board, or you think about an explorer and what their kill board would look like, I would not imagine an explorer to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% efficiency on C kill, but that's what we're seeing for most months that aren't dominated by these exploration sites where people are flying them who aren't used to flying them. That's pretty incredible.
The Astero is the king of Explo, and the pacifier to a lesser extent. Like, my Astero fit, if the only way a Synesis, for example, which is a step up as a destroyer should destroy a Astero because destroy his frigate. The only way a Synesis kills me is if he's a dual web blaster fit, and he has to slow me down enough that his blasters can actually apply. Like, I can solo Synesises with single webs, because if I get the orbit right at 7.5k, he can't slow me down enough to hit me.
Yeah, go a little bit lower, Nick. Right underneath the summary, it has the monthly history, and it goes by month.
Hey, right on. 677 billion ISK killed by Asteros, but 587 billion ISK lost in Asteros. That is the most this year, already in December.
Someone was saying Interdimensional is the king of Expo. Yes, I agree. He is very good, and he's been on the show a few times, and I really like his content.
Before
we still have a week of December left, or almost a week of December left, and the event's happening all week. So there's a chance to add to those numbers significantly.
Now, the events, they don't end until the 3rd. Is that correct?
January 4th, yep.
Yeah, whatever the Tuesday is.
Before we get too far away from the exploration frigate, like what is the king, I do just want to make a point, or really ask a question, because I'm not sure what the point is. Astero is a faction ship, T1, right? It's not one of the T2 exploration frigates. The Enforcer, or the Pacifier, is a T2. Like, when people look at, okay, the Astero is the king, because it's faction, its bonuses and stuff for data sites and relic sites are lower than the T2 exploration frigate. So what makes it the king relative to other ships with stronger bonuses to the exploration sites themselves?
So there's two ways of doing these sites. You can get a T2 covert op ship with a lot of bonuses to the scanners. Scan down the sites, finish the sites, and get off grid before an Astero can scan it down. The Astero is not going to scan it down as fast, but if he gets on grid, decloaks, locks you up, and gets you pointed, the Astero is going to kill pretty much everything you give it in terms of frigate size. T3Cs are going to kill you, but Asteros versus pretty much any frigate, if you're piling it in well with a decent fit, you are going to kill them pretty easily.
Oh, right on. So it's like the sites are more of a king of the hill style. Doesn't matter who gets there first. It matters who can survive.
Yeah. So if someone else gets there first, but I can get on top of him, I can kill him, and then I can do the site. And if I kill him, he can't do the other sites around, sort of thing.
Right on.
The pacifier is just too limited edition to be used mainstream.
Yeah, pacifier is interesting.
What are the sources for the pacifier? How do you get it?
I know one way you get it is through the referral program. If you refer someone and they Omega their account for a month, I don't remember how many people you have to have sign up, but you get the pacifier, and eventually whatever the cruiser is, and then a marshal. You can get them that way, huh? Yeah, the enforcer. That's it. You can get them that way. I think they've handed them out for login rewards, but I'm not sure. But they're from Concord, and they're fairly hard to come by.
All right. In terms of tips and tricks to do these sites, scanning down sites is really painful, really annoying. So what you do is when you first land into these winter storms is you go to every system and you ignore every site that's up currently. Because these sites have been run fairly often, they're respawning fairly often, just ignore everything. You clear out all the wormholes, all the relic sites, all the other stuff out, And any new site that spawns in is all that's left, and it's almost always going to be one of the Winter Nexus events sites. So it means you can find the new sites really easy, really quickly. The other thing to note is if you enter a system and there's a site already up, potentially someone has already scanned it, is sitting there cloaked up, waiting for you to come in and trying to attack you. Whereas if you're already in the system and you see it spawn, then you could potentially scan it down faster than that, do the site and walk off faster in a heron or something like that. And you can know that the Astero is going to be slow to scan it down, so slower to scan it down depending on skills. And you potentially can finish the site and get off a lot quicker.
Right on. Before we transition, I do want to mention in chat, we learned that you can also get the the pacifier through Project Discovery. So that's is it currently set up to benefit COVID research right now? I know on the Neocom menu, it's got like a DNA strand sort of icon thing on it. And over time, it changes what it looks into. I think when it first started, we were identifying exoplanets in spectra of lights. And then we were looking into like isolating cells in images of microbes or something like that. And I think we're doing something with COVID right now. So it's developed over time, but apparently that's one of the rewards you can get through that program.
Yeah, that program was all about conquered ships, so that makes sense.
And it confirmed it. We are doing some COVID research right now with it too. So that's awesome. All right. Any other final thoughts on the event? It does look absolutely amazing. I went and recorded some footage to have as my background today. Of course, this stream can see the in-person live view from the Astero's perspective.
Is this event longer than previous Winter Nexus events? I only remember them being like 3 weeks before, but I think this is going to be a full 4 weeks, isn't it? Or pretty close to it?
That's a great question.
Ran for ages last year. I was doing it for ages. I had so much fun.
Was it? Okay.
My Astero got up to 23 kill marks.
Yeah, because they're came out on the 9th and it runs through the 4th. So yeah, full 4 weeks.
Which is exactly the same as it was last year. 2020, it ran from the 10th to the 5th. So just off by a day, but that's, I guess, where the Tuesdays landed.
Correct, yeah.
I think it is longer than the normal events, though. I can't think of another event that was a full month long. Like Crimson Harvest was 2 weeks, wasn't it?
I suspect it's more to do with the time of year for the event.
Yeah, but they just need a downtime to turn it off. There's no dev input to turn it off.
Yeah, but it allows something to happen over the holidays where people are interested in the game, got some bit of downtime because they're not working. It gives out a fair bit of ISK, so it's encouraging people to come back into the game, that sort of stuff.
And the login rewards are only 13, I think. So if you logged in if you logged in every other day, you would still get all of your login rewards as well.
Yep, and there are still days left to get those rewards. Quite a few skill points. I ended up using a lot of my uninjected skill points to inject the new, what are they called? Crystals on some of my mining characters who hadn't trained into that before the stuff. So now I'm mining in Type B. We'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Oh, you're a waster. Oh my goodness. The millennials will be so upset at you.
It was despawning anyway. I'm not too upset. You know what? Let's jump straight into the industry talk while we're on it, just for the sake of the fun. So the crystals came out. I know me personally, my experience with them, I haven't hopped on a moon yet. My moon pops. I'm not going to tell you when my moon pops, but soon TM. And I've been doing a lot of gas sites. And the gas sites, they doubled in volume just like everything else. But instead of having crystals, the Tech 2 has extra waste compared to the Tech 1. And Nick had a question that we were going to be looking at where, like, what has been happening as a result of these changes with the wormhole gas specifically. And so I did some looking at the markets, and I had to reevaluate the way I was processing my gas that I was harvesting. Previously, as an example, when I would harvest C32, which is pretty common, but it's one of the more valuable gases you can find in low-class wormhole space, previously it just wasn't worth it to refine it or to react it, excuse me. You'd be better off selling it to the market, even on buy orders, than reacting it and then selling the end product. But now that there is more C320, which is sort of the pair to C32 is what you use to react with it, available, the market for C320 tanked, so now people have enough more of that to react with the C32, and so C32 is worth reacting again. It's basically, you have to, if you did reactions pre these changes, you need to redo your math now that the markets are adjusting to the increased volume, because some things are worth producing that used to not be worth producing, at least from what I've seen.
That's part of my problem with a lot of the industry changes. The industry changes happened, and everybody's like, oh, CCP didn't have a plan. They had a plan. The problem is the plan just went into effect way too slow, in my opinion. So imagine if everything that's happened had to happen 2 months apart instead of 8 months apart. So you had the industry changes, and then 2 months later you had these mining changes. 2 months later we had the dynamic distribution, which isn't going to come till next year. Then you just kind of have one big giant shift in exactly what you just said. Nick shifted his production back in April and went to new things, and now you're shifting your reactions and coming up. So all these dominoes are like falling in slow motion rather than, what you'd expect dominoes to fall. But the fact that they are moving, markets are shifting, the end result, we probably still won't know for a couple more months at the minimum. And that's kind of frustrating because you want the answer now. What's the min max? What's the best play? And I don't even know, right? I mean, it depends. I didn't know that guys in wormholes would start doing reactions again. Now, how is that going to compare once they get to compression, and how much people in wormholes are holding up waiting for compression so that they can get it out quicker, because that particular person isn't worried about reactions. They just want to get rid of their gas. So, and how's that going to affect the market? And if 32 tanks again, and right now I'm having the hardest time getting C50, but if 32 tanks again, then how is that going to affect your reactions? So there's still a lot of play there for how it's going to end up.
Yeah, I can tell you for sure. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was going to say, with the, and I'm with you on, if the changes would have been 2 months apart, but would that be too short? My thought is that would be too short of a sample size time-wise for CCP to look at to make the next step. So anyway,
the steps. My point is the steps were already pre-planned. Everyone thinks this is reactionary stuff, but it isn't. All this stuff was pre-planned. It just takes a while to get it into action.
It's not just that. Any change they make is going to take a long time to take effect. Let's take, for example, battleships taking R4 moon goo. The R4 moon goo is mainly mined in HiSec. So first of all, you got to wait for the price to spike in jitter. Then the miners have to notice that the price has spiked in jitter. Then they have to organise to scan down the moons to work out which moons that they want to put Athanors on. They then have to get hold of Athanors, put the Athanors down, give it a month to pull the moon goo, and then they have to turn around and mine it. So this change, the R4 moon goo might have changed 2 months ago, but for the R4 moon goo to actually start getting a steady state price, it's taking 2-3 months for it to filter through the whole economy. The same thing is with the hulks. Going from a Rourke to a hulk, it's 5.8 million skill points or something to get it going, roughly for what I was calculating out. That's 6 months of training. A lot of people are just going to let that train over the next 6 months. So we're not
that's
going to
4 months.
Well, yeah, 4 to 6 months sort of thing, depending on how you do the attributes and that sort of stuff. But a lot of people are just going to let that train. So we're not going to find out until 4 to 6 months down the track how many people have actually skilled into hulks, how many more minerals, moon goo, and all that sort of stuff is going to start flooding the market and changing the market. This is not going to happen, and you're not going to see the end results for another 4 to 6 months, if not even later.
And I think one of the complicating factors to this is speculation. Like, sure, the real changes, the real impact from miners adjusting their production scheme isn't going to happen for months. But people trying to predict what the end result will be and make money off of that is happening right now. So if somebody thinks, hey, as a result of these changes, stuff is going to get more expensive, they're buying it all up as much as they can right now, and prices will spike. I think like when the first batch of industry changes happened and R4 goo went into battleships, that was, in my opinion, the main driver of the spike in battleship prices. People were making bank producing them if they did, because due to speculation, battleships were just insanely priced, and then it took months for them to come back down because people were just holding on to them thinking the price would go up because of the industry changes.
Depends what you call a battleship. Marauders, for example, they spiked significantly with the industry changes, but the reason they spiked with the industry changes wasn't completely to do with the industry changes. If you start actually looking how much stuff goes into a Marauder, it's easy to blame industry changes to say, oh, the Marauder price spiked. But the actual price of Marauder, very little of it was changed through industry changes. The reason they spiked is because the damage was doubled. And all these people took a lot of time to skill into it. But in terms of taking a lot of time to skill into it, it might have taken them 2 months to skill into a Marauder. It takes over 6 months to research the BPO. So the lag of people are now wanting the Marauders, but people can't produce them. And if you actually sat down and start doing the numbers, Marauders are making 60, 70% return on investment whenever you make them. And they've just spiked 20% because there's Winter Nexus event. It's not because industry changes have spiked them 20%. The Winter Nexus event has spiked them 20%.
Good time to be an industrialist if you're building the right things, is what it sounds like. Let's talk about the pilots trying to get into industry. Specifically, if you're like a nullsec pilot, presumably, and I've seen a few leaks of forum posts and stuff, and I hope, Kenneth, you can share some insights from your group, where with all the changes to waste and residue and that sort of thing, presumably groups are coming out with rules on what can and can't be used in different areas of space. So that determines what you, as a budding industrialist, are going to be skilling into over the coming months. Are we seeing that play out, or is everybody just sort of like, meh, whatever, fly what you want to fly?
It kind of comes down to two issues. There's the expensive moons, normally heavily controlled by the Alliance. And in that case, the R64s and the R32s are going to be use Tech 1 strips or ore strips, 0 residue. That's pretty much going to be across the board. R16s, people are going to care a little bit less about. R4s, I don't know anyone that's not going to let Rorquals, B-types, whatever, mine R4s. You're already at the bottom of the barrel for nullsec. You got double the amount of ore, and I know some groups with the double the amount of ore are having trouble just getting through what's there. So use the B-types, use the Rorquals, because as you said, it only lasts for 48 hours. And Nick has this problem in HiSec too. His moon pops, and in 48 hours, it's gone. Yeah, it's great if you could mine it all and have no residue. But if you're going to lose a third of it just for the sheer fact that you physically can't mine it all, then go ahead and use the B-types and get as much as you can, as quick as you can, and be done with it. So, there's not a whole lot of difference there. B-type is 37.5% waste, roughly. So just get what you can and move on with your life, and don't just sit there and mine for the sake of mining. Now, if you can mine it all, it's a finite resource, then you need to start looking at how can I reduce my residue. But if that's not the case, get what you can get while the getting's good, and wait for the next cycle.
We had an interesting update to what you and I were talking about before. I went ahead and stuck the stabilization rig on my Athnor so I get 72 hours. Got added a couple more heartbeats into the core. We managed to mine out the whole R4. First time since I've had that moon that we were able to get the whole thing.
Now, is that with A-types, B-types, or T1s?
We stuck with, okay, if you were a T2 user, we stuck with A-types. If you weren't, obviously just regular T1 strippers.
Oh, that's
So-
awesome then. So the increased yield helped you enough to offset the double the amount of ore, and you minimized your waste.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
perfect.
It's
And
not
yeah,
only
so
that.
we got a good chunk more than anticipated. We were kind of doing the napkin math. Sorry for interrupting you, Ren, but this is what we would anticipate getting M3 wise for the whole poll, and we actually had a little more than we anticipated, and it took us less time to do it. So there were some happy campers.
I think the pit a lot of people are forgetting is their time is also a resource. So let's say you mine your moon with T2Bs and you get your 37% wastage, but you mine it 40% faster. That extra 40% of time, you can then turn around and mine something else, like an ice belt or pyrite or whatever else you want to mine, or go on to the next moon. So as much as people are like, oh, residue, you got to also consider how much time it takes to mine stuff. And if you can make more risk overall, if you actually sit there and go, if I use the bees, I waste a little bit, sure. But I also turn around and get this extra stuff that's a bonus off to the side. I might get some ice for my fuel blocks. I might get some minerals or something else or somewhere else. And that's what people are forgetting when they go, but the residue, is they're not realizing that time is also a resource and they're wasting time to not waste moon or to not waste stuff that they're mining.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ren, on that. And that's one of the conversations we've had in my core and with the folks in my local that I yak with is a lot of us don't even call it waste or residue anymore. It's the potential of what we can get if we get on it. And that's how we're trying to approach looking at it. So, my moon popped yesterday, Christmas Day, and, by the time I got home from playing with the grandkids, there was already 6 people out there just hammering away. So it's happening. We're working on it. We're trying to get it figured out.
You guys have Orca boost too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
The other interesting one that we started doing math on with my nullsec corp was how long can a coveter, if we got 10 guys and coveters on an enemy's moon, how long can we waste all their R64s? And it's surprisingly fast, and how much damage you can do is ridiculous. And you can actually pay for that cover in terms of all you've destroyed. You can destroy more ore than the coveter's worth very quickly.
Yeah, especially if you're looking at a moon that's like 25 to 30% R64, you can, and it's only a month-long pull, you can whack that R64 with 10 coveters in a matter of probably, half an hour, somewhere around there, maybe 40 minutes?
We did 35 minutes. We were saying 10 coveters, 35 minutes was destroying an R64.
Yep. Yeah, that's about, it all depends on the percentage, but yeah, you can wreak havoc. And that's probably with just porpoise boost, right? Not even an orca? Or is that no boost?
I think we had no boost, but a porpoise will be fine as well. The amount of damage these things do is ridiculous.
And porpoise is just minerals. You don't have to build it. It's just like a cruiser to build. It's nothing special.
Oh, it is special, damn it. I build lots of them. By the way, a bison-built porpoise will set you back a mere... Anyway, but no, great little ship, battle cruiser size. So they're a little bit on the slow action.
The one thing that I personally like about the porpoise is that you're not locked in place with the new siege for the orca. For most other miners, that's not a big deal because they have a defense fleet or they're in high sec where your enemy is a ganker, so you want the extra tank from the core. But for me out in wormhole space, it's if I get caught, I'm dead, period, end of story. So I want to be able to run as fast as I can. And I like that the porpoise, I don't have to use a siege to get the max boosts out of it.
Well, an orca, I don't think you need it to get max boost. The core just gives you range, right, Nick?
Correct. Yeah, and what we actually found is in our little moon, we had 3 orcas, so we had them staggered across the field. So we had overlapping, and with very few exceptions, when someone was out to go get this crazy rock that was far away, we didn't have to run the core to get the extra range off of it.
I might have to make some further adjustments to my mining setup then. I misunderstood.
Now, with the core...
Now, the Rorqual's different.
Now, with the core running on an Orca, the Orca's mining drones boost up with what they pull in. Not if you're like we're running mostly Mackinaws and skiffs, it doesn't affect if they're using any mining drones, but it does the actual Orca's own.
Yeah, the other thing is the Rorqual gets strength and range from the core. The Orca only gets range from the core, but the boosts stay the same. And then a Porpoise doesn't have the core. But you say you're in a wormhole and you want to run, my Titan aligns and warps faster than my Orca does. Just keep that in mind. That is one slow, fat pig.
Well, I mean, so the way that I do it, in most cases, I'm pre-aligned. So I'm fitting a Higgs rig, which significantly increases my mass, but also means my top speed is very, very low. So I will sit there going like 10 to 30 meters a second, pre-aligned out. And then if anything shows up on grid, I warp away. In most cases, stuff isn't waiting for me on the grid. It will just, I'll be out in space, they'll come in jumping through a wormhole, see me on D-scan, start scanning me down, that sort of thing. So as long as I have those 5 to 10 seconds before they land on grid to pre-align, the Higgs, and I even modify some of my fits with webbing myself. I do chain webs to slow myself down even further so I don't get too far away from the rocks. And that's how I stay pre-aligned. But you can't do that if you've got a core.
Yeah, someone just said it's 15% on the core. So
yeah, I'm just checking it now.
It's just minimal. It really doesn't. It's not like the Rorqual. The Rorqual without the core is crapola. It's a monster with the core. The Orca's minimal.
Yeah, if you're
It's
a maxed out Orca pilot, with a T1 core, your normal cycle time is going to cut a Mackinaw down to 96.8 seconds. With the core running, it's 90 seconds even also. I just popped that up from this morning.
Okay, so it's 6 seconds over a minute and a half.
And I haven't tossed a T2 core on yet to play with. I got one in my hangar, just haven't got to it because I'm lazy.
Awesome. Great discussion. We're going to be actually continuing this discussion a little bit this coming Tuesday in the USTZ. Nick and I are going to be going through sort of the process we use to determine how we're adjusting to these changes, what ships we're using, how we're fitting them based on the recent adjustments to the way mining works. So tune in then for that, a continuation of this discussion, if you will. There was a question that I had in the back of my head at the start of this. Skill training and what ships people are using in nullsec. We discussed briefly that the only thing really impacted where people care are the high-end moons, R32s, R64s, where you want to be using type A's or basically stuff with minimal residue. But most people, I say most, many people have skilled into Rorquals, and so now they need to cross-train over into Hulks. And I think the point that I saw made in our staff channels was that because people just haven't finished training into Hulks yet, we're still seeing a lot more Rorquals than we think we will eventually once things settle down. Is that right?
That's what I'm predicting. I know that the person who runs the Goon Moons talked to me, and she said that was a lot of they were having a lull right now where the Rorqual pilots didn't want to mine because they got nerfed, but they're not quite ready for the exhumers or the barges yet. I know PL's been working on them for quite some time. Most of my guys were probably expecting a little bit bigger nerf than what they got. And I know some of the other groups are working on it. Like Horde had quite a bit of Rorquals anyway, but they're also a lot more on the newbie side. So a lot of them were only in barges and exhumers anyway. They were, like, hey, eventually I get to a Rorqual. Now maybe they don't have to worry about spending that extra SP, and they could just finish out their Hulk and go from there. A lot of it depends on boosts too, whether or not you have boosts available to you.
Fair enough. And I mean, one slight aside, if you're a Rorqual pilot who's no longer allowed to mine your R64s, just grab a Concord Rogue Analysis Beacon, have a buddy with a carrier pop it for you, and then go run that. Apparently that's the meta for running the Concord Rogue Analysis Beacons, the crab sites, capital only PvE sites, is you link to them with a carrier, because the carrier can warp out quickly, and it's also less strategically valuable than a dreadnought or a super carrier. And then bring in your Rorquals to run it, because you just have super powered heavy drones, right?
Yep, that's one thing I've heard about. Not necessarily planned, but nevertheless pretty cool. And it keeps a 6, 7, 8 billion-ish ship on grid. So there you go.
Oh man, I still remember when they first came out. It was some guy in Goonswarm posted a video where he and 4 or so of his buddies were in Rorquals with their sentries out. And so they had their carrier warp in, launch the beacon, anchor to it, whatever, then warp back out. And they just sat there with their drones on aggressive, just nuking through the rats while the site ran down. And everybody in the comments was like, this is so broken. These sites aren't working. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kenneth. Like, we still have the capital ship on grid for 5 minutes up front. That's what we wanted out of these sites, working as intended.
Well, it's working. I don't know if they ever really thought, yeah, we'll toss a Rourke in. But I love the creativity of Eve players. They're awesome.
The biggest thing, the problem with the crab beacon is their prices crept up. I think a little more than people anticipated. So
I can tell you why that happened.
Why is that?
Because the mining... so the crab beacons are bought using Concord LP. The mining changes meant that the outer ring excavations or ore miners, strip miners, don't produce residue. So their prices exploded. So they went from 180 million to like 360 million. A lot of the Concord LP suddenly went in, because you can exchange it for ore, went into ore. So the Concord LP price went from about 600 ISK per LP to over 1200. And that's just like if you're selling straight LP. If you start putting it on the market, you're getting 2 to 3K ISK per LP. So that's why the crab sites have gone up, is because the outer ring stuff went out. And basically we need to run more incursions.
Wow. All right, good to know. If any of you are former incursion pilots like myself and you have a few million just LP sitting on a character that you're not using anymore, maybe now's the time to cash in.
Well, the time was when the mining changes happened. I made a lot of ISK, and quite a few others made quite a bit of ISK.
Ren, you gotta ping me. Ping me next time.
Well, then I wouldn't be making as much ISK.
All right, fair enough. I gotta pay more attention.
If I can,
all right, what else should... Go ahead, Nick.
Oh yeah, I'm kind of jumping back to the somewhat with the mining stuff. One of the conversations had in local while we were mining, we got a little heated because we're salty miners, and one of them was decrying how they've just ruined mining, and it's like, no, I don't think so. Anyway, that goes back and forth, and one of the things brought up, and I don't know, is one of the goals at some point was the interdependency of transport, where, if you're going to need this Feld out in null, you're going to have to trade with somebody in high or have it moved back and forth. And this goes, for ore transportation between, high, low, and null. Has that actually been occurring? I've got one camp that was arguing, it's absolutely killed it. No one does it. And I'm like, well, then how are they building out there? And vice versa.
So I'm building 8 to 16 Marauders per week. My jump freighter goes to Jita. It drops off 7 Marauders because that's how many it fits. And it fills up with Pyrite at the moment and brings it back. It's sort of, the volumes are sort of similar. So it's working pretty well.
Okay, so from what you're seeing, the transportation trade between the high, low, null, and obviously wormhole gases is happening because they're showing up in the markets. Kenneth, is there anything, like, I know you said you had like individual suppliers you kind of go to. Has that changed much in your play style?
No, most of my pyrite comes from R4 ore. so I can get plenty of pyrite that way for the most part. Isogen, I still have stacks of it from, back in the Rorqual days. Noxium was my only real holdup. I have a hard time getting Noxium, and I think I'm down to a couple 100 million, which should last me quite some time because you don't use a ton of Noxium anyway. So I'm pretty much status quoing, holding on. At some point, something's going to have to give, and I'm going to have to start looking at sourcing some other things. As far as wormhole gas, most of my guys just rage roll till they get a hole close to me, and then just cargo deposit it in a something that I can get into, contract it to me, and then just go back in their hole. So that's not really an issue.
No, on the scale you're doing it is obviously not the typical person like Ren or myself or Artimus, obviously, where we're actively looking for, okay, if I need Noxium, I either got to go to low or I got to trade. That's my two options. Right now I'm trading for it because I don't have enough low contacts to make it worth my while to sneak in and out of there. So I'm just curious how different folks are handling that.
So see Dunk Dinkle in the chat, and I'm going to say I'm a fairly new industrialist. I've only started really doing industrial the last 4 months. I've been researching BPOs for a lot longer than that, but I've been set up to go into doing stuff and actually started doing it in the last 4 months. I have doubled my wealth in the last 4 months doing industry, just from industry. Like I do other things. The industry has made me stupid amounts of this last 4 months, and as long as you're paying attention and looking for opportunities, and at the moment Marauders are the opportunities and Hulks, but there's others out there, you can make a lot of this doing industry, and anyone who says industry is dead is too busy being very narrow with their point of view on industry and not looking at the broad spectrum of all the things you can build, because Eve's got huge amounts of different things you can build.
Yeah, I think Nick's kind of found the same thing. He had to shift what he built, but the amount of ISK he's making has actually gone up.
Slowly, but I'm not hitting my stride yet. That won't happen until probably end of the first quarter of next year, till I really am comfy with it again. But I'm not dying. The initial, Nick is dead did not happen, so I'm pleased about that. I'm just scaled back and adjusted some.
And you mined out your moon for the first time.
I know. That sounds funny because I haven't mined an entire moon out in literally over a year. And so that was we had we threw some fireworks on, and I still had some station level fireworks, and we fired them off. We're all excited.
What's the duration that you do on your moons? Do you do max duration?
Negative. What we do is every other Saturday. And because I'm off Saturday afternoons, all day Sunday and Mondays. So that gives us till, Tuesday evening to mine it out. So we got a 72-hour window, but there's not many of us.
Fair enough.
I guess it's not only that there's not many of us, it's they're all in similar situations as me. Our playtime is limited. We don't have, I wish I had 8 hours to sit there and just hammer away. And it's just not a reality for me and a number of other players right now.
Ren, did you have some?
Someone's asking, what would you do as a new player getting into industry? I'd learn how to do Eve Cookbook. Is probably the big one, and just sit there and play with it and learn how it works and find something that makes 30 to 40%. If you want a suggestion right now, I'd say hacks are making about 25% ISK from what I'm doing. It's an 80 million ISK BPC or BPO to buy. You do not need to research it to do the T2 version, and you can buy the T1 versions that are researched off the market on contracts very cheaply, and you can make that 20 to 30% very quickly. The skills to get into it are relatively low. You will have to buy some reactions, so it's a bit of a pain in the butt. But yes, you can make ISK relatively easily doing industry now.
I usually tell people to start with T2 ammo. It requires a little bit of turnover. You can't necessarily do it full tilt. Maybe you can at first, depending on how many pilots you have or how many slots you have. But start from there. And a couple other things that sell real well: stealth bombers and covert ops. They sell very well. The ISK investment at the beginning is pretty low. And then all the new blueprints that were just released, especially the ones that are only 100 or 100 million, 100 or 150 million. If you have a little bit of extra ISK, you can get into one of those, research it up, and then start building the intermediate materials. That stuff also, depending on, it shifts which one has the better profit, but there is quite a bit of profit to be had there as well.
I find that interesting. We talk about new players that want to get into industry, and you guys immediately go T2. And it's like, stop it.
It's
okay?
T2 is not a huge amount of skill points.
Hey, I'm in the middle of a sentence here, so hang on. When, with a lot of the newer players, and I'm talking under a month in the game, it's like, all right, stick with something that's mineral only initially, battle cruiser and below, a lot of your T1 ammo. Get something to get the feel for how it's done. The turnover on profit may not be terribly high initially, but you'll learn how it's done. And then you take that next step of, okay, now here's how you do that invention to get that T2 version. And then here's how we find those materials. You got to step them through it. That's just my technique.
Well, the ammo is the same way. You start off with Tech 1 ammo, then move your way up. I didn't mean to just start with Tech 2 ammo, but that would kind of be your end goal. The same with the frigates. Right now, I'm sure Herons are selling very well, but if you have leftover Herons at the end, start turning them into buzzards slowly. And you don't necessarily have to have all the skills to do the inventions. You can get Tech 2 BPCs on contract fairly cheaply. Sometimes better than you can even invent yourself, depending on your skills and your chance to do the invention. Buy the BPC and just build them from there.
I have a question for you all, because I feel like I'm doing something wrong with my industry setup. The way that I have been looking at industry and jumping into it, not as a new player, but as someone new to industry, is just like each step of the process is an additional percentage of income I'm getting based on the time I spent mining. So for the most part, I mine wormhole gas. So each step in the reaction process, as I get closer and closer to a final good, is just an increased margin on the value of the gas that I harvested. Is that a good way for a new player to look at it? Where like, it's not necessarily, hey, you want to build this end product, and so there's a complex chain of logistics for you to figure out in the meantime, but rather you've mined this amount of stuff. Where are the ways you can increase the margin on that to make the time you spent mining more valuable? Is that a good way to look at things? Am I just doing
Absolutely.
it wrong?
Absolutely. That's why everyone picks on me and saying that I'm not the typical industrialist, because I don't think that CCP could make something so complicated that I couldn't do it myself. It's just not feasible at this point. And I'm not alone. There's a bunch of us that just wouldn't care. Now, you can make it so complicated that it would almost be impossible to do, but that doesn't mean that in the end, I don't have enough pilots and enough slots to make that happen. So that aside, then if you look at, remember back in the old days with moon goo and POSs, how many people just mined the technetium and took the tech to JITA and sold it because they didn't want to be bothered? I ran a 160 POS reaction farm for close to 5 years. I made so much ISK that most people would cry. And that was back in 2008 or 9, whatever it was back then. Back then, a billion ISK was a lot. You could buy a 60-day GTC for 250 million ISK. And I was making 10 to 12 billion a month easily. So always take your raw and react it and increase your profits. And that's not, I mined it so it's free. That's, I mined it and it's worth X amount. but I'm going to spend a little bit more time and make it 2x now. Now, you may have to put some stuff with it, and there's some fuel costs in there and this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you take what you had to buy to react with it, take all those costs, and you end up doubling your profit margin, that includes paying yourself for the gas, then all you did was increase your profits. As long as you paid yourself the same amount for the gas that you mined as you would have purchased it in JITA, then your profits doubled. That's definitely worth it. Now, if you ended up and you reacted everything and your profit is the same as if you'd have just sold that ore in JITA, well, then just sell the ore in JITA or the gas in JITA, right? But if you can increase your margin, and that's what the people with vertically integrated shipbuilding, every little step is an extra increase in profit. Now, at some points, the profits get so small that sometimes I buy composites from other people, like ferromonic condensates. There for a while, they were about a 2% profit margin. Well, they're a pain to build, so I just bought them from other people, let them make the 2%, save me a lot of time, and then keep going, right? So that's what you have to look at every step of the way. Every time you go to build, or every time I go to set up a run of something, I look at each and every intermediate step. How much IS do I make off of each step? What steps can I eliminate by just purchasing that end product and inserting that into the chain and keeping myself from having to do all that work for next to no profit? And that's where the budding industrialist can really come in. You do the same thing. Look at someone's going to build Marauders, okay? They need this, 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 and this. Okay, well, if I get this one step that's 35% profit margin, well, if I have enough IS to go buy those input products and I can build that and then put that on the market, not everyone will be able to build everything along the way. As long as there's enough volume there to support what you're doing, volume meaning volume of market trading in JITA, then build it, put it on there, and take your profit that way. And you may make more profit than building the end ship.
There is something I'm going to say. I thought how Kenneth just spoke for a long time, and then I ran into a friend who built orcas in HiSec, and the orcas that he was building effectively cost less than the products he was putting in. And I thought he was an idiot. I told him so because I'm that sort of person that says, mate, why are you doing this? You're an idiot. And he turned around and said to me something I found really interesting. Why do you go blow up a ship in PvP? Because you enjoy it. He enjoys building orcas. That's his thing. That's what he loves doing. And he is willing to lose ISK to build the orcas, and that's his vice, and that's what he loves doing. And that's his PvP as such. That's him going into low sec and going to blow up a 500 million ISK Stero or something I'd do. And he loves doing it. So him building orcas at a loss, and he's helped one of the reasons why sometimes orcas actually make no profit, he doesn't care. He just loves building orcas. That's his thing.
It reminds me a lot. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ren hits the nail right on the head there. Is a lot of what I do, and because I was one of those people that built a buttload of orcas because I liked it. I like building stuff.
Yeah, there's some people who will only fly ships they build. That's just their thing. I'm not saying it's financially sound, but it is their thing. And the Tech 2, one thing I tell people, if you ever are in a position that takes a little bit of more startup capital, but the Tech 2 components, the stuff you use to build Tech 2 ships, especially the armor plates, the capacitors, and the processors, those three take the longest to build. And when someone says, hey, I want to build this, and then they look, oh, well, this takes 14 hours, this takes 14 hours, this takes 14 hours. Oh, these capacitors take 4 days. Oh, well, if I go to JITA and I just buy them, then I can bypass those 4 days and I can build it in 14 hours. So those are the three that take the longest to build typically per ship hull. Just build those and put them in there. The profit margin on some of that stuff is ridiculous. The profit margin on a small subset of it is borderline insane. And especially at certain times when CCP make changes, like after the capital expansion in 2016, and everyone was building Tech 2 heavy fighters and the bombers for supercarriers, the plasma thrusters and a few other things were between 300 and 400% profit margin in JITA. I mean, it was insane. I made more ISK on that than I did building the fighters. So I bought extra BPOs so that I could do both at the same time. But there are times when that stuff comes up, and they do make a significant amount of profit, but they do require a little more investment.
It sounds like we're sort of describing different solutions for different kinds of industrialists, right? So if you're the kind of industrialist who you want to build orcas, or you want to have that project to build a Moros or a Rorqual or something like that, just go for it. It's fun for you. Your gameplay here is about having fun, not making ISK. Big numbers will go bigger no matter what you do. If you are the kind of person who wants to maximize your ISK, then you probably want to go do a lot of market research and find out where those profit margins are. And sometimes you'll be building the subcomponents, sometimes you'll be buying them to save time. And then if you're like me, I've spent the time harvesting these materials in space because it's what I have access to, I have fun doing the harvesting work, then the industry component is just, okay, what additional steps can I do to make the time I've already spent harvesting more valuable? Different solutions for different kinds of people.
Yep, and that's a good thing about Eve is there's many different ways of doing things, and none of them are right and wrong. And industry, especially, people are like, oh, industry is dead, and they're talking about cap production. You start looking at how many different versions of industry there are in Eve. Cap production is a very, very small part of it, and that narrative that industry is dead because cap production is dead is just patently false.
All right, we have talked a whole lot about industry today. I had no intention of talking about industry very much when the show started. Do we have any other final points on this? I'm quite happy with the discussion that spawned.
There is one point I want to make. Nick, can you pull up Eve Cookbook? Because people abuse this poorly, and I want to show something.
I don't know. Do you run Eve Cookbook? I know someone on TIS does, and they can't fix it. But when you use Eve Cookbook, you have to be very, very careful, because if you have it select to do the reaction jobs, it adds in the fuel for those reaction jobs.
Yes, this is how I'm going to show you how to fix it.
Show me. I'm watching.
What he's fixing is the fact that if you build 3 ships at a time, Eve Cookbook bakes in the gas for all 3 ships. So you need to factor that out. Like my Tatara, I fuel it constantly, and if I make 2 or 3 ships and I pay for that fuel for the month, then everything else, that fuel cost doesn't really come into play. Or you can amortize it over every ship. Different. You can amortize it over every ship you make that month. Either way you want to look at it, but it adds that fuel cost in for every single ship.
No,
and that's just not. That's just
Ren,
not.
Okay, Ren, go ahead and talk me through what you want done.
All right, so you're doing a Dominix and you've got 1. Just hit calculate. Dominix isn't a great solution, but I'll show you what happens with Eve Cookbook if you hit calculate on your 1 Dominix.
Already done?
Marauders would be better, but what it does is it does a minimum run for every thing. So it doesn't include oversupply. So if you need, say, 5 of one part, and the minimum run in Eve is 10,000 of the part, it never includes the fact that you got 9,900 or 995 left over. So what you do to fix that is you make your quantity like 10, 20, or 50 so that the overage isn't there. So there's a lot of people, when the industry change is coming in, would go into Eve Cookbook and go smash it with 1 and then go, oh, look, it's losing ISK. Industry is losing ISK. A lot of the reason why I was doing that is because these overruns. So the easiest way to fix it is just put your quantity as 100, which means that the overruns as a percentage compared to the stuff that's actually being used is very, very small. And what that means is you're actually getting a more accurate percentage. So something like a Marauder can actually look like it's negative ISK if you run 1, but if you're running 100 of them, suddenly it's positive. And what it's talking about, and the reason why you're getting them, is that extra bits that are left over afterwards, which you can still sell or use or make the next one.
You also get the benefits of run bonus if you put in 100. And the one thing that Lazy Blacksmith does that Eve Cookbook doesn't, especially for Marauders and Tech 2 ships, is it allows you to put in the quantity that you want and the quantity that you're building. So like I use parity decryptors. So my BPCs are 4 runs each. So if I want to build 100 Marauders, I put in 100 as the quantity, but I put in my build quantity as 4. That way it only takes the run bonuses for 4, not the run bonuses for 100, and then extrapolates out 25 different runs of the 4-run BPCs, which is way, way more accurate of a price. The problem is Eve Cookbook drills it down to raw materials, whereas Lazy Blacksmith will only go one set of materials down from your finished components. So you kind of, if you're going to use those and you want to build large amounts of Tech 2, you kind of have to do a little bit of both, in my opinion.
Yeah, you got to use your tools and understand how to use the tools. The reason you're struggling there is we need to put reaction jobs on, and you're in high sec, so the reaction jobs are going to struggle. The difference between a 10 run and a 100 run in terms of the little bits left over for the in-game calculation aren't very much. I actually found it was like 3 extra over 20,000 or something when I went from 4 to 8. So going to a 100 run doesn't really make much of a huge difference.
So, Artimus, was that part of the wrap-up you wanted?
I mean, that was some fantastic info.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, for the people who want this industry info, like, this show is a freaking goldmine, I tell you what. I'm personally just so impressed at the amount of tools available. Let me rephrase that. Eve is so blessed with third-party developers that we have a choice of tools. Like we've mentioned Eve Cookbook, we've mentioned Lazy Blacksmith, we've had Ravworks on the show before. Like, the nuances of how these calculations are run aren't you have your spreadsheet set up wrong that you spent 2 months working on. It's, do you know how to use the tools somebody else already built for you? Like, I just am personally amazed by that. Slight tangent. Anyway.
Yeah, good stuff, man.
All right, well, let's wrap up the industry talk for a bit. We'll probably come back to it throughout the show just because it is permeating all of Eve discussion at the moment. And let's talk a little bit about the characters who may or may not be doing industry right now, because they have been changing who they're flying for and where they may or may not be living. And the screen you're on right now shows a fantastic example of that. Down in Alliance Movement 7 days on Dotlan, we can see the third one down is Evictus Dot. And previously on the show, we talked about some corporations leaving Evictus and going to different groups. And it seems like more have been leaving and more have been landing in what will be their final home. And it's not where I would have expected. So Evictus were living down in the southern area of the map. Memory serves, they were part of PIBC, right? I always get them confused.
Nope, I believe that's right.
Awesome. PIBC, they're the coalition with Army of Mangoes in them. They're fighting alongside Wrecking Crew against Fire Coalition, who are sort of in the Scalding Pass and some other Wicked Creek, Detrid, that sort of area, pushing down south. And some of the Evictus Corps were staying in that coalition, staying in PIBC, some going over to Wrecking Crew. But a surprising number have been landing in Initiative. So if we scroll on down on this page, Nick, and then once we get through the corporations, right there in that table, click on left twice. And that'll show us who left most recently and where they're landing. And we're seeing they're either landing in the Initiative for the most part, or Hero Coalition, which isn't a member of PIBC, but they are a member of Wrecking Crew. So they're still staying in the war, contributing to that front of the war. So we might not see a huge impact on the Fire Coalition versus Wrecking Crew conflict due to sort of this dispersal. But it just was interesting to me and some other folks who brought this to my attention that so many of these corporations were heading over to Init in the Imperium versus their own coalition or the coalition they've been fighting alongside this whole time. So that's some interesting news to keep an eye on. Just thought we'd mention. Also, Hero Coalition is a relatively new alliance. You may not be too familiar with it. If you're a not super old, but a relatively old player, you may recognize the name as an old coalition like Brave was a part of, and Test, I think, at one time. Unrelated to that name, might be a callback, might not, but this is an alliance that was started sort of as an offshoot from Dreadbomb. I believe the founder was an FC who left Dreadbomb for various reasons, decided to do their own thing, but they're still flying under the Wrecking Crew coalition. They live in Providence, as you can see there on the map, and they've just been having quite the growth spurt as a result of Evictus dying down and some other sources. So it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on in terms of movements in and around that southern front of the various wars going on. We've had a lot of other big moves too. If we hop over to your next tab with Test Alliance, please ignore the namesake of this episode of the show. There have been a lot of moves in Test, and they've lost almost 2,000 members in the last month, just from corporations leaving. And they are some not no-name coalitions as well. Yeah, okay, thank you, Nick. Nick is pointing out to the stream, Test Alliance was at like 15,000 members. They're down at 13,000. So they're not dead. They're not dying. To answer the question in the title of the stream, Test is fine. But they have been losing some folks over to Pandemic Horde. Key names we mentioned previously on the show, Her left to Pandemic Horde. They recently lost one Royal Fleet Corps. That is Villy's corporation, one of the most notable figureheads of Test Alliance. And then also Southern Comfort and Tropa de Elite are worth noting as sort of, it's hard to describe. They're what you'd imagine if you imagine an elitist corporation in EVE Online. That sort of like super old bitter vets, high skill point, they theoretically they know what they're doing type thing, FC type group. But a lot of characters moving, all of them going over to Pandemic Horde and joining, I suppose, up with Kenneth and crew. So that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. It is a trend that we're beginning to see. When the war between Pappy and the Imperium, Vietnam, I think, is the name that seems to be coalescing on everyone's mind. When that ended, we saw Legacy Coalition break up, quite a few alliances disband. And some alliances, like Brave, have been saying, okay, we're done with this coalition stuff, let's go do our own thing. We saw similar stuff with some other alliances, mostly landing in the Pureblind area, Triumvirate and Cloud Ring as well. But then some of these other alliances are, their corporations individually are moving into bigger and bigger blocks. So what used to be, you had Legacy Coalition, then you had the Imperium, and then you had PandaFam. Now it's just sort of Imperium and PandaFam, although PandaFam's breaking up a little bit. But we are definitely beginning to see a bit of a consolidation of corporations between either we are staunchly independent, we don't want to be a part of this coalition stuff, or we're joining the biggest alliance and the biggest coalition that we're friends with type thing.
Yeah, and our friends over in Initiative have jumped, as part of that, folks, they've gained almost 2,000 members here recently. So that's, and they're a good group already, so they're going to be a heck of a lot more fun.
Indeed. And I mean, they're going to need it too. If you look at what Imperium has been active with in terms of conflict, they've got their noses in basically every area of the game. So they've got a war ongoing with Ranger Regiment and French Connection fighting against Triumvirate and Cloud Ring. So that's where they're actively trying to take space for the Imperium or Imperium alliances. Then they are actively involved in defending some of their allies in Red Menace Coalition, who were recently embroiled in the conflict down there. Red Menace Coalition live in impasse and are ending up on the side of Wrecking Crew and PIBC against Fire Coalition. So you'll see them active there. And I'm sure the addition of Test Alliance as a more active participant on the side of Fire Coalition is probably a good enough incentive for members of the Imperium to join in on the fray. And then you've, of course, also got them up in Outer Passage quite a bit. You'll see Init fleets over there killing Athenors, as well as dropping on Rorquals and Capitals and everything like that. And that's It's an interesting place to be. Obviously, you've got literally tens of thousands of players, so they can handle doing multiple things at once. But I think it's also a testament to the model we've seen replicated throughout other groups and organizations, which is like having your SIGs and squads. So it's not necessarily the alliance leader has decided, hey guys, our whole alliance is going and doing this. They might not even know what's going on. Rather, individual groups of players have all gotten together and said, hey, we want to go blopsing, or hey, we want to go participate in this war. And anybody who wants to join them can, with some restrictions. And then they can just go and do their own thing with the benefit of flying with all of their friends, regardless of what corporation you're in. You're just in the same coalition, got the same infrastructure for communication. Let's go do our thing and have some fun. So that's really cool. It's a benefit to that sort of consolidation I was talking about before, but that consolidation could also be destructive. It depends on your perspective. And I'm personally curious in you, the audience, the listener's perspective. How do you think this sort of consolidation that we're seeing is going to impact things? Is it temporary? Is it just people finding a couch to crash on before they go do their own thing? What do you think? What's your opinion? How about the folks I've got on the stream with me, Ren and Nick? Any thoughts from your guys' side?
Well, from being in that, where we moved from alliance to alliance, a lot of it in the cases where I was still flying out there was the core leadership looking for what's best for his or her group. Where can we go that we're going to fit in, that we're going to be productive and not lose a bunch of people because, we're going over to fly with X and a third of your people are like, screw X, I'm never flying with those clowns. So there's a lot of consideration. I think a lot of that is at the Corp CEO and director level.
Right on. If I put myself in the shoes of a Corp CEO or director and I'm like, okay, I want what's best for my group, what would be the situation where I'm like, joining a big block isn't what's best for my group? What about a big block is not something someone might want? I suppose we might want to like bring Dunk or somebody on to talk about the decision of wanting to stay independent versus joining a big block. But just as a thought experiment, maybe you want to be able to control who you fight with and who you don't fight with. Maybe you're a PvP focused group, so you don't want a big list of blues. Maybe you want to build your own infrastructure instead of relying on an alliance to do it for you. Those are some alternatives or some options to consider. Nick, not Nick, Kenneth, you're part of a big block, have been for a long time. Has the recent influx of groups like changed anything for you? Is it all smooth sailing? Like, what's it like? You've gained a lot of new neighbors as of late.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me because I don't really see those neighbors. I mean, we do, but we don't. So, PL is still relatively small. Even if you add PL and NC together, we're still smaller than Horde, Bastion, Init, Goons, all that kind of stuff, right? So, and Fraternity, we're still smaller than all of that. So it's kind of, I don't want to say we're insulated because we do fly with those guys during wars, but absence of a war, we typically only see each other in passing. Like their fleets will come through LXQ where we're currently living and go on out the Paula Gate to whatever they're doing. If someone comes into LXQ and those guys get a sniff of it, I'm sure that they'll come down and we see them then. But to think that we interact on a daily basis is probably pretty far-fetched. Even weekly basis is pretty far-fetched. We kind of do our own thing. That being said, we did pick up, I think, one corp from test, something lollipops. I'm not really sure. It's a god-awful name, but that's beside the point.
Brave Operations Lollipop Division. I remember the name because it was hilarious.
Yeah. So, but the bigger groups, the content creators is what comes into play. Who do you have that can FC? Who do they have that can FC? What are you bringing to the table, and what do they have on the table that you can benefit from? So if you have a couple good FCs and you've got a small group, but they have another 50 or 100 pilots, if you want to go roam or filament, then all of a sudden the amount of the pool that you can draw from to form a fleet is much bigger. So there's plus and minuses on both sides to what you have available to you by joining a bigger group. The other thing about a smaller group is you were talking about your own infrastructure and your own this and your own that. That all sounds great until you have to defend that shit. And the big group comes in there and they have their steel-toed boots on and they try and kick over your sandcastle, and all you do is sit in the corner and cry because that's realistically your best play at that point. It's rough for the small groups if you want to pick everything. Now, if you're willing to go to like some of the areas that aren't so inhabited, I know Pure Blind for a while was kind of a area where there was a lot of smaller groups in there. You could fit in, but eventually someone's going to come over and kick over your castle, and unless you join or align with a larger group, you're probably not going to fare too well when someone wants you gone.
Fair enough. I think that's a really good assessment. I do want to, while we're on the subject of Horde and Test and that whole group, it was asked in the chat that we don't not forget to mention Fraternity. If you've been watching the discussion in the EVE news sphere recently, you may have heard about some drama between Fraternity and Horde specifically. Quite frankly, the story is a mess. As with most drama situations, different people have different pieces of the story and different perspectives, and nobody has the whole thing yet. And also because it's ongoing, we don't know how it's going to end up. So take everything I'm about to say with a massive grain of salt. This is just some of the info. We don't have the whole picture. Nobody does. But effectively, some of the highlights of the timeline, Fraternity and Horde were resetting. Fraternity is moving out of their holdings in the drone regions, moving and consolidating in their tributes. I forget the other regions that are right there. Venal,
Vale.
I think. Yeah, Tribute, Vale, and Venal. Well, yeah. Venal's NPC, but that's where they wanted to focus their efforts. They're moving out of the drone regions. And with that, there was also an announcement that Horde was going to be renting out Tenal space. Then a alliance, like State of the Alliance, comes out from Fraternity. And of course, it's in Chinese because that's the language that they speak. And a translation gets posted to Reddit, which is highly inflammatory of Horde. Basically just throwing trash talk, making claims about things that were said, promises that were made, how things are going to look going forward. And then as a result, Horde gets super angry. They send out a ping. Goblin specifically sends out a ping about like the deal hasn't been struck yet, agreements aren't in place, and so now previous things that may have been on the table aren't anymore, but they're open to negotiation. And so as I understand it, where we are right now is there is still open to negotiation. Negotiation might be actively happening, where basically diplomats are trying to figure out what was said, what wasn't said and was a mistranslation, who can do what to smooth things over, and everybody gets what they want. So we don't have a full resolution yet. We don't know exactly what the fallout's going to be. I can't even personally say for sure whether it was a mistranslation or not because I don't speak the language. So that's just what it is. But that's the drama going on. If you hear people making crazy claims about Fraternity and Horde and their opinions and State of the Alliances, just take it all with a massive grain of salt because nobody has the full picture right now. All right, I'm going to wait a minute to see what people in chat say, to see how angry they are right now.
Border skirmishes as we listen to you type.
Kenneth, you got a hot mic right there.
Who does? Me?
Yep.
Yeah, you do.
We can hear you clicking away on the keyboard.
It's a nice mechanical keyboard, I will say.
Huh, I don't know how, because, I'm hot mic for you guys. I can see my green thing on, but if I let go of my button, it turns off on Discord. Oh, there it goes. Now it went away.
All right, now we're fixed. Cool.
Okay, sorry. I don't know why that, I don't know.
No big deal. It happens.
movie title lost in translation.
Yeah, very
Diplomat-
possible when you're talking dissimilar languages. You know, and a third party translates it and says, he called you a jerk, and it's like, maybe or maybe not. You don't really know it all.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. My favorite tinfoil hattery to come out of this is that it's all just theater to spawn conflict. So these groups who were formerly allies, them not being blue anymore means they can shoot each other. It means that members of Horde can get content by going and roaming fraternity space or whatever, but they may not have incentive to. And so the tinfoil hat that I'm amused by is that in order to make sure their members were okay roaming each other's space and getting content, they are manufacturing conflict and drama to get people back into the game and logging in because they have an enemy now who's next door that they can go and fight.
Yeah,
and of course it'll be easy to diffuse. The leaders just say, hey guys, sorry, it was a mistranslation. Let's go fight goons again. But for the time being, they're happy to make their old friend their frenemy and go do that.
It's not as tinfoily as or maybe I just have a good tinfoil hat too, but that would not surprise me if a couple of the leaders get together and go, hey, dude, we got to keep the people energized for a while until we've got something bigger.
Oh, fair enough. All right, well, in other war news, of course, conflict is still happening around the map. As we're looking at timers and such, we're surprisingly seeing a lot basically everywhere. Once again, I'm still just astonished at the resolution that Triumvirate has been maintaining over in Cloudring. When they were first getting attacked by Ranger Regiment and French Connection, I thought they'd be gone in a month's time, and they're still here and in a much better position than I was expecting. So to Kenneth's point about being sort of the independent group, and if a bigger kid walks over with his steel-toed boots to kick over your sandcastle, Triumvirate has found a way to be resilient, at least to a certain perspective or to a certain extent. Looking further down south, we're seeing conflict extend and move to different places. The most recent update that I saw that was interesting was Initiative making a lot of activity or having a lot of activity in Scalding Pass, which is very much sort of the back lines of Fire Coalition space. Hasn't really been the centerpiece of much of the conflict, but they were killing some structures out there and also dropping on quite a few radders. It could have just been a lucky wormhole spawn, so they had fleets in the area at the time, or it could be they're trying to open a front in the back lines to relieve the pressure on allies in Impasse. We'll have to wait and see how that progresses. And then, of course, there's Outer Passage. Test Alliance just lost a few thousand members. They've also been more active down south, which means their home space is more open to harassment. So we have seen a few destruction of structures as well as an increase in the destruction of ratting and industrial ships there. So that's another place to keep an eye on. All right, well, that's my spiel on the PvP side of things. We had a fantastic discussion today. Thank you very much, guys, for that on the industry side of things as it stands. Also had a good update from Ren on the Winter Nexus event. Still ongoing. It ends January 4th, so you still have some time to get your login rewards and to get your event sites done.
Artimus, do we have a sec? I have the Eve cookbook up, exactly what he was talking about. Help make his point if we have time.
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
Can you go ahead and share it, and I'll close mine out and get yours up?
Yeah, how do you pick which one?
In the Discord, when you hit the screen, then you got to kind of search for which one it is.
And while we're pulling that up,
Got it.
My understanding from, or never mind, it's pulled up fast enough. We can just roll with it.
So as you can see, I just picked a random place in, I think it's Quirius. I don't know, it was wherever we were last night. We filamented into here. But if you look, the estimated build cost per item is 865 million ISK. This is for a golem. So this is for a marauder. cost 865 million to build, but that's at a quantity of 100. So now if I take that back down to 1, and I'm recalculating here, you'll see it'll come up to 900 something, I think. It's 939 million. So that's what, 70 million roughly difference in price, just due to leftover runs and the way that Eve Cookbook prices things. So there's considerable room here for looking between the lines that most people don't even consider when they're building this stuff. So you really have to know your tools to get accurate pricing. And I've baited a lot of people into conversations about this, about building stuff below cost, but honestly, they just don't know what they're talking about, and Ren let it out of the bag. So I'll go ahead and focus on this and let people know how it works. But if you start doing capital ships and dreads and stuff, it really gets kind of stupid in the difference in pricing. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that, and then people can take their own conclusions.
Or, I mean, it sounds like you're saying it's worthwhile building capitals again. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not quite there, but it's not nearly as bad as a lot of people make it sound, unless they just go to Jita and buy all the end parts and then pay everybody for their profit along the way. Then it's pretty bad. But if you know what you're doing, you can actually get around a lot of the stereotypes, for lack of a better word, of how bad certain things are. They're not nearly as bad as what they are if you know the data that you're looking at. And I just proved it right here with this ship that's what 7 or 8% of the price change just by trimming the overruns from building the intermediate steps. I didn't change anything else except for 1 to 100, and that's the difference in price of the hull. Now, a little bit of that is the run bonuses, but that's going to be about 2 or 3 million per hull. Everything else is just straight up using all of the available materials that you get from these runs. So it's splitting hairs, but the hairs are big enough that they're worth splitting.
Awesome. I'm really glad that we were able to come back through and get that information out to folks. All right, well, that's about all we have for today on Talking in Stations. I think we hit all the major points. I can remind you once again, if you enjoy the Industry Type Talk this coming Tuesday, December 28th, 0100 Eve time, technically Wednesday, but Tuesday for Nick and I here in the USTZ, we're going to be talking about the process of adapting your mining fleets to the new changes. Nick and I have very different incentives, very different situations. So our focus is less on, hey, this is optimal, and more on, how do you look at the situation you're in and find what's optimal for you? Then also coming next Sunday, January 2nd, it is the first Sunday show of the new year. And as is tradition here at Talking Stations, we're going to be going through the most influential of the previous year. So most influential of 2021. It's going to be an interesting one to talk about. As far as how we determine what that looks like, we generally have different categories: most influential FC, most influential coalition, alliance, etc., etc. But we'll be able to basically take a look back at 2021, see who the movers and shakers were, see what they moved and what they shook up, and talk about where it all lands. That should be a fun conversation to have if you're on TIS staff and haven't seen my ping yet, which I haven't sent. So hopefully you can't predict the future. Be on the lookout for that and get your thoughts in. All right. Any other final thoughts from the crew?
The only thing I've got is, remember, for all of you industrialists, flying around in high sec, remember, when you're ready for your next industrial ship, go ahead and check your local trade hub dealers for Bison built products. All right. If you know if it's Bison built, it's quality.
Is there a feature in the game yet where we can see who built the particular thing?
God, I wish there was. That'd be so funny.
Only Abyssal mods.
Only Abyssals. Well, Nick, you should get into abyssal rolling. Then we can have Bison roll the abyssal mods. That would be fun. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me. Nick Bison, who's been engineering as well while he's been giving us his insights. Kenneth Feld, member of the CSM, member of Pandemic Legion. We also had Ren on earlier today, showing us some insights into running the Winter Nexus sites. That's it for Talking in Stations this Sunday, December 26th. See you next time.